So on to the second part of our session today. As we were talking about earlier, we really wanted to take a different approach as to cover the topic around fraud, just because we've been to a couple of different conferences by now, and we wanted to have a different format and really approach some of the questions that we feel are still rather unaddressed as it relates to this topic. So we really took it upon ourselves to think about some of those questions that resides and put together an all-star panel that would really touch on, these questions. So welcoming back, moderating the session will actually be Yevgeny Perez. We also have Francesca Noli from Play Studios joining us, Ann Vu, Performance Marketing Director at Small Giant Games, Brian Sapp from Jam City, and Lynn Tijon from, I'm sorry, I might have butchered that one. Yeah? Okay, from Congregate. Warm round of applause, please.
Hi, guys. Me again, Yevgeny from Iron Source. And I think this is a great topic to talk about the break and after the previous session. And we'll start with intros. I think, kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Francesca Noli, and I'm the VP of Product at Play Studios. But for the purpose of this talk, until about 3 weeks ago, I was VP of Marketing and UA at Product Madness. And I think that's a much more relevant experience to be here, and that's the context in which Susan and the team asked me to speak today.
Hey everyone, I am Lynn Chen, and I am the Director of Marketing at Congregate. We are a mobile gaming company, and if you guys are familiar with us, we do a lot of casual games and are known for adventure capitalists.
Woo.
Hi guys, thank you Singular for having me here. I'm Ann Vu. I am the marketing director or the performance marketing director at Small Giant Games. We are a 36-person game company based in Helsinki, Finland, and we develop empires and puzzles. And I'm responsible for the full stack marketing at Small Giant. We do everything from analytics, media buying, creatives to automation in-house.
Hi, I'm Brian Sapp. I oversee UA marketing at Jam City. Jam City is a casual game developer. We have about 6 games, I think, in top 200 grossing right now, so a pretty large catalog. Speaking of fraud, I actually feel like a fraud up here in front of this crowd. This is a really great crowd. So thanks for putting us together, Singular.
Cool. I prepared a few questions. Some of them are associated with stuff that we've seen before. I also want to leave room for you guys. Please think about very hard questions you guys want to ask the panel. I think it's a great opportunity. I think we'll start with a very soft ball. Let's say, is some fraud to be expected? And what level of fraud is tolerable, if at all?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think given what you just went through, unfortunately, there's definitely a level of fraud that's going to be permeating most ad networks out there. I've had a couple conversations with folks similar to yourself at ad networks, and PMs focused on fighting fraud, and their worry isn't the egregious actors that everybody can find. I think we can kind of sniff those guys out. Their worry is the very small publishers that are just siphoning off enough not to be noticed. And so at the end of the day, like in digital marketing, we have to expect that that's happening, and there's no way to really stop it across the board. And we just have to accept that there's absolutely going to be like a percentage of our spend going to fraud. And then for us, it's an effort. It's an effort to try to stop fraud. So there's an opportunity cost to trying to stop as much as we can versus focusing on our high-level strategy of growing our business. So I think, yeah, to answer your softball question, there's definitely an amount of fraud we can't stop.
Cool. Anyone else?
So fraud usually, to me, just isn't acceptable, but if we had to choose, some sort of number, I would say probably 5%. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that shouldn't impact the overall pool of the users that we buy. In general, what generally happens is, fraud happens at basically in a kind of like a minute sector, but it's just so prevalent in that kind of sort of buys, going to RTBs, programmatic, things like that. In general, it's I think we just kind of live with fraud. I just don't want something that's like 20%. And so, yeah, I think that is just varies by buyers.
Thank you. I think now that I think we're kind of aligned on these expectations of the reality of fraud, where we can't really block all of it. I want to talk about the partners that you work with. Do you use your attribution solution, fraud tools, anything in-house, any other third parties, maybe you rely on networks, whatever they're working with in terms of fraud?
I can speak to this, but Francesca, do you want to go first? Go. Oh, okay. For Congregate, we use our attribution partner. So we have our fraud tool prevention, integrated into the marketing stack, and that just makes it easier for us to basically monitor and really get that step in terms of fraud prevention. I think what we can't really do with a team that's not very big is to allocate resources into building a fraud tool in-house. So that's the choice that we've kind of gone for and find it to be very effective. Now, in terms of the buys we do across the ecosystem, really similar to everyone else, we do social, of course, Google, Apple search, and video networks. And there's a number of long tail networks that we used to really want to explore, but they have by far been the places where they're where all the bad apples lie. So we don't go there as much.
Anne?
Yeah, so I think before the built-in app prevention or fraud prevention tool like that we had, we were doing it manually. So like monitoring clicks, monitoring conversion rate. It was just doing that for over 30 networks was really exhausting. So it's super nice now to kind of have a built-in tool like with the attribution partner to kind of detect it for us. But of course, we definitely do a lot of manual fraud detection because it cannot filter out everything.
Yeah, exactly.
For us, our attribution provider is our first line of defense. And so we definitely defer to that. But we do see fraud that sneaks past it, right? And so second line defense is a couple internal dashboards, tracking some of the metrics that you showed earlier, especially time to install from click. And then lastly, we're working on building some other internal solutions that we just got up and running in the last couple of months. And those have been actually extremely eye-opening. Especially around seeing people spoof IDFA, resetting those devices. And so, a lot of it's still manual for us at every step. But I think the goal ultimately would be to get to an automated version of this as much as we can. I don't know how much of that's possible, but UA is our biggest line item, and so capturing fraud is obviously a big priority.
And how much do you think is really being blocked today by these tools or internal processes? So let's say you're buying from a channel that is 100% fraudulent. How much do you think will those tools, how big is the gap of all those missed installs that are attributed correct, but actually should be suspicious and fraudulent?
Sure. I do think that's quite a bit, actually, and I think one of the issues that I know of for prior monies is that we also rely on an attribution partner to do the baseline, and then we take a monthly deep dive to validate some of these things and see how we want to go from there. But I wouldn't say that I'm comfortable telling you that we are, sub 5%, because I don't know that we measure actually how much it is. And so it could be a much higher number. Some of the metrics that we look at is actually our paid to organic ratio. And so as long as we see that paid organic ratio to keep some in a constant healthy base, we look at incrementality that way. But that said, as you were saying, there might be things where that you can inflate organics, and we caught a few. And so it's very hard to say actually how much it is and how much we are catching.
Yeah. I think to your point, I would definitely, I work with all the tracking companies and also work with their prod research teams and the product teams. And I can definitely say that this is something you guys should use, but it's something that is very, very far from where it should be. And it's not necessarily will ever reach a point that you can just turn it on and think there's no fraud. So you have to apply both all the tools that are in your power, especially the real-time tools, because you don't want to be dealing with that kind of end-of-month process of getting your money back when those installs were not attributed to the right source. But I think on the operational side, it's very, from what I'm seeing last year, it's still very important to make sure you have the right decisions, the right processes. You do your own due diligence on each channel that is offering you the world. I think on the point of incrementality specifically, do you have a process internally that you monitor incrementality when you onboard a new channel? For example, you ever turn on a channel, you saw no lift overall, or you stopped buying from a channel and nothing really changed in your overall numbers?
Yeah, so for incrementality is a great question because I think there is two parts to it. First is that it can be part of fraud. The second part, it can actually be a totally legit channel that you turn on. It just doesn't deliver new installs. It's just tapping in the same audience. And at Product Madness, we did find that increasing the number of partners did increase the install. And the way that we were monitoring this was two things. We were monitoring our organics to paid ratio, and as well as a new attribute that we call new to network, which meant new people. And over the last year, that became a key number for UA performance more than ROI, because we always felt we were making ROI back just fine. Really, it was, are we bringing new people into the network? When we turn on a new network, are we getting more new people that we've never seen before? I've been able to attract those. And so those are probably the two numbers that we were looking in terms of incrementality. But not so much necessarily as fraud, but just is this a good channel for us to be even experimenting with?
So we actually ran some really large incrementality tests recently, and I think gaming especially is very noisy because of the ranks on the App Store charts, and then ongoing featuring and events in the games. So we decided to run this test across our whole portfolio because we didn't want to basically say, oh, that was inconclusive, right? And we had a lot of interesting learnings from it. I can't share everything, but I think the biggest thing is we had always thought about organic as a ratio, and it's not a ratio. There's an upward limit on how much paid media will give you in terms of organics. And so that was one of the biggest learnings. And I think these tests really, and I know I'm kind of getting away from fraud here, but these tests really opened up more questions that we have. And as we kind of started re-engaging with ad networks, we're basically looking at what the incremental lift is from each and every one as we go forward.
And are there any, so like you said, incrementality is partially covering fraud, but also is an important question to answer internally. Specifically for fraud, are you guys, what are the other KPIs you guys are monitoring? Anything that you feel that you found out that is unique or really powerful in terms of identifying fraud outside of the standard, like CTR, CVR, TTI stuff?
For us, identifying fraud is pretty obvious. Obviously, you kind of have the extremely high click-through rate, but then when we kind of look at the downstream metrics such as retention or monetization, it's also easy to kind of see the quality of the traffic there, whether there's a difference between low quality traffic and fraudulent traffic for sure. You can kind of see it in that it just has really different behavior. So for us, definitely it would be the downstream metrics that is the final guiding light.
Further, I think UA teams are super skeptical, as they should be. Both with data, is a data integrity right, and then with performance. And so besides the irregular metrics, if something looks too good to be true, it probably isn't true. And I think we capture fraud very often when a channel performance that you would not suspect to be as good as organics or as good as the very, very optimized channels is like almost a red flag, right? Like there's just no way that channel's that good. It's just
And
not
then you turn it off and nothing happens to your...
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we dig, right? And so turning off would probably be the final thing. We want to look at a couple other things first, but you know, it's just it starts that peeling back the layers of the onion to try to understand what's happening.
I think, and this is a tough one maybe, but for example, from what you've seen in the previous session, where on the topic of attribution manipulation, when you think about, you know, we have a real user, a real click reported, not a fake click coming from that user, it's something that is very hard to, when you comb through the raw data, you have nothing that says that it's fraudulent. Do you have any process in place that monitors whether an ad was really shown on this channel, or if that click is really a click? Are you applying any tools or anything that you maybe negotiate with the partners, ask them to stop or just shut down, whatever the process is?
That hurts my head, and unfortunately we don't.
The question hurts your head, or yeah?
No, there's, you know, just the whole idea of domain spoofing and how it all works. It's so technical and it's so advanced that it's just not something that you know, us marketers can see very easily when it's passed over into the downstream metrics for us. So that's, you know, that kind of passes back to, I would say, the onus of the network. If they're able to, you know, sift that out and figure out, you know, what's going on here, because they're ultimately the ones who brought on the publisher.
What if it's the network itself?
Then we'll have a talk. But I think what we'll do in cases like this is it's like buying insurance. And the best thing that I can do is really write an airtight IO that's going to say that we're not going to pay for anything, you know, any of this fraudulent installs in the event of, you know, all of the following. And that's really just the only way that will, you know, really change things is just withhold payment. So on our end, unfortunately, nothing at this point, but maybe some folks here have done something to prevent that.
Yeah, I think one, it's super, like, I don't even know how you police that without a third-party solution. I worked at Warner Brothers before I joined Jam City, and on the brand side of Warner Brothers, which is like a big media agency, they had a company called, I think, Integrated Science. Maybe some people in the audience know them. And I met with them before I left, and I could be wrong, but they didn't have a great solution for mobile that worked with SDK-driven traffic, rewarded traffic, because the tech is so different.
Nothing changed.
So I think once that solution exists, it's interesting, but if a performance marketing company really cares about return on ad spend, I would almost put that at the bottom of the list. I think when that actually is important is probably when you care about where your ads are showing up in terms of brand safety. And if that becomes a very important thing, then that becomes a more meaningful technology, but it's going to cost money, it's going to be a percentage of your spend or something, and I'm not sure it's worth it at this point.
Yeah, I think so. Brand safety is a different topic, and it depends on the marketer and the company. I think to Lynn's point around the things that you apply on the IO level, like these are the metrics, these are the thresholds, I'm not paying for that. From my experience, from what I've seen last year, communicating that through the IO is basically communicating to the fraudsters what thresholds you need to manipulate. I haven't seen any metric, CTR, CVR, TTI, whatever it is, that cannot be manipulated by a fraudster. And one of the simplest things to do, by the way, by fraudulent channels would be, for example, if you say that, hey, per each publisher, for each publisher of over 50 installs, if this and that happens, then I'm not paying for that. And then the channel will just randomize 50,000 different site IDs, and you'll have 95% of your installs coming from line items with under 50 installs, right? And that's very simple to do, like you've seen before. So my advice would be very careful with communicating your internal thresholds, and also be very careful with thinking that this is really the only way to solve this.
So I completely agree with you, and I can tell you that at some point, Prime Manes is owned by Aristocrat, which is a large company, publicly traded, and they came in for an audit, our first ever full audit, and they asked us, can we see an ad and track it all the way to the dollar in the bank? And most of you can imagine my reaction. About 3 weeks in, we gave up in that quest. I'm sure it will come back, but this time around, we had to give up, be able to actually go the full thing. Which, as someone that says, I'm analytical, we're all performance-based, there's performance-based marketing, and we cannot actually track it to that level of granularity, is incredibly frustrating. And I do also agree that there is too much money in this industry for fraudster not to be one step ahead of us. It's just incredible the amount of money that there is. They'll keep being one step ahead of us, and we'll be catching on with them for a while. But hopefully the tools will get better and better to the point that maybe we'll be catching so many that what is left is not as appealing. The ways to keep doing fraud are maybe not as appealing or as easy as it is now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges meeting marketers in the last year and talking about this topic was, in some cases, I was meeting teams that I'm meeting people that obviously they're responsible for it, not necessarily knowingly, but in some cases they're compensated or their team growth goals are conflicting with the fraud topic. If you're compensated based on ROI or based on paid users, you have to deal with that internally in terms of how do you redefine internal goals and KPIs, in some cases even compensation. I was wondering if there's any advice you can give on how to align internal team growth KPIs not to conflict with fraud. That looks so good, and the ARPU is great, and ROI is amazing. How do you deal with that problem?
Well, I think it needs to be. You need to care about return on ad spend. I think one, right? That should help to weed out some of the fraud that you might see otherwise, especially with impressions,
some of it, yeah.
installs, clicks. I think the second thing is, and this is less on a UA's team's hands, but it's definitely having accurate SSRV and making sure that your revenue data is good, and then understanding if, especially more of a mid-core problem, hardcore problem, if users and other folks are refunding. So it's understanding the level of refunds that you might be seeing. So that'd be like level 2. And then level 3 is just, to me, it's like the skepticism. Right? I keep coming back to that, but this is why we have talks about, can the machines really ever take over? Probably for a lot of the day-to-day, but at the end of the day, you need that human intuition to be like, that just smells fishy. That's not right. How this network that has 0 publisher SDKs come out of nowhere, and you're telling me their algorithm is 10 times better than Facebook's, so I think it's where you just kind of understand what is available to the ad networks, and if they're delivering something that doesn't seem right, again, it's not going to be right.
Anne, what about your team?
Yeah, so aligning the growth goal against fraudulent traffic, you definitely see examples of you said sources that are better than Facebook, that are better than Google. But for me, I think keep it pretty simple. It's is the growth sustainable? So looking at beyond day 7, day 30. Retention, looking at beyond day 30 ROAS, and looking at the full prediction, and then also is that channel scalable? Because I think that if it's a fraudulent channel, it cannot be scalable. It can only poach your organics. It can only poach from the other networks. So for us, we definitely aim for sustainable growth as a way to kind of combat fraud.
Cool. I want to leave time for some questions from the audience, and I think. Last question would be if you can share what is the biggest mistake you've made or your teams have made dealing with fraud, and if there's one thing the audience, the marketers should take back home with them and that is actionable that they can do to clean up their own traffic.
So I think for Prime Manes, for the longest time, we were thinking if it's fraud, it won't perform, and so will be able to weed itself out. Whether the algorithm will learn, we will learn by optimizing campaigns manually, the partner, whatever. And I think we let it slide too long that they were just taking our organics. And I think that's still what is the biggest fraud there. The easiest fraud is just the organic spoofing. And I think that is quite massive, and that cannot be really weeded out by looking at performance, at least for what product madness is concerned. And so probably waiting too long to realize that fraud is not just the bots. Fraud is a lot more than that.
So I think some of the kind of the learnings we've had, and this is maybe probably particular to one of our biggest games, is for a long time we wanted to scale the game as much as possible. And so we were just focused on trying out everything under the sun. What we found out was that after kind of the core networks that basically hit, the goals that we want, which is scale and efficiency, it just became so much more work to basically grab any of that extra long tail incremental install volumes that we were looking for. Honestly, it used to be so much work and then basically catching a bunch of fraud. And now that we just kind of focus on basically maximizing the networks that we trust, we just, we're able to do more with what we have in the existing ecosystem that works out, and then just, makes it so we don't have to expose ourselves to so much risk. So I guess there's that.
Can you share how many networks you're currently working with?
Yeah, so we're currently running with about 10. So we used to kind of run, 20, 30.
Yep.
We've cut them down quite a bit. Yep.
Same story here. I thought that in order to grow, you need to add more networks constantly, and then it just kind of became really tedious to kind of run everything and then catch the fraud, going through the process of trying to get credit, and also the fraud is polluting our product KPIs and affecting our company profitability, and it just became like a time suck, honestly. And instead, what we've learned through the years is to actually, like Lynn said, just to kind of focus on the core channels that's going to drive growth for you, and it's going to be a clean channel that doesn't really require a lot of fraud dirty work of kind of chasing after networks and arguing with them, and that saves us a lot of time to focus on other things that are more important. And I think the one thing that I've learned is actually to share with other marketers. So if you experience have a bad experience with the network, you definitely need to kind of let other people know. You need to kind of discuss it. There are multiple Slack groups and communities that have knowledge sharing, that have these discussion forums to kind of share, and it saves you a lot of time, and it enables the community to grow. So you see your community as an extension of your growth team.
Let's see. I covered a lot. I think you kind of need shit to hit the fan before you come up with a plan to stop that shit from hitting the fan. And so I think our biggest mistake was not capturing fraud right away, and then it's months later, and it becomes a big mess. Yep. So we have since put process in to make sure that doesn't happen. And a lot of it starts with our internal, obviously our MMP, but then our internal dashboards to identify it quickly.
How would you recommend to people identifying that shit has already hit the fan?
What, sorry?
How do you, what can other people implement to understand that maybe shit already hit the fan and they're not aware of it?
I think at the very least, just a simple time to install using your MMP data will capture quite a bit of stuff that gets through the MMP. And that's just a simple, that data is being passed back via API, so you can create a dashboard with that, a simple visual dashboard, and you'll see, if I'm getting hundreds of installs within 5 seconds, it's probably not. It would be the high level, and then make sure you check that before you approve any invoices.
Cool, thank you. Any hard questions from the audience? Gadi?
Let's see. test. Does it work? Awesome. I have a quick question. I'm seeing a lot of differences between different companies and how they utilize fraud capabilities. So, we invest a lot in fraud, and we went all the way to enable customers to customize the rules, and someone even wanted to run code on our server, right, in real time. That's like as crazy as it got. But then on the other spectrum, I see people that don't even write their own fraud rules, and then on the extreme end, people don't even use fraud module. Not with us, it's built in, but still, like some people don't even buy it from an external provider. Why do you think there's such a variety? Is it just market education? Is some companies just love to deal with it more, and others think it's working? How do you guys see that as managers, leaders in your country, in your companies?
I think it's as a UA team, you like to pull every lever you have, and I think that's just one more lever to pull, is how extreme do we get on our fraud protection versus how loose, and see what changes in the data. So I think definitely having the ability to move those criteria is really important, because it helps us. It's no different than like multi-touch attribution, right? It's like these are like complex problems that we want to look at to really try to understand how it impacts our business. So I'm not surprised that people are on different ends of that spectrum, and I think that's something that you can expect teams to keep moving and playing with. Because there is going to be some level of fraud that's getting through. It's just bad data, right? Just we know for whatever reason that timestamp is too close to that other timestamp because of pre-caching or whatnot. But I think it's really just giving the buyers the tools to move that. They're going to want that, right?
So we all know that fraud is a pretty big issue that kind of slowly grows over time in your program. Once you find it, you fix it. Now, there's some explanation that needs to happen to executives or leaders when you have to clean up a program that you've kind of let something like this happen for so long. So can you kind of go through what you've had to do when you explain your program to these people regarding what just happened, why it took so long to catch it, and those things that run to your mind?
I can share some of my experience because I've been through that with a couple of teams. And usually when I come in and show this stuff, it depends. My conversion rate depends on who's in the room, right? So if there's only one guy in the room, usually nothing happens later, whether he's responsible for it or not. If there's a team, the cat's out of the bag, it needs to be addressed. And then with senior management, usually, because it's exactly that conflict of it's my responsibility. I just spent $5 million on air, right? It's a very big issue to deal with, and at least what I'm trying to help with is to explain to the senior executive team is how easy it is to buy this, how good it looks like, and how it happens to everyone. And only now the market is at a stage where people are listening, and it's time to act. And no one better to deal with it than the people that have made those decisions. It's part of the learning process. Money is gone. Some of it can come back. That's also part of the process. When you realize there's fraud, there's good ways to get some of the money back. It's impossible to get all of it, pretty much. But I think that's what I'm seeing. I feel that marketers sometimes need help from the outside. That's my experience.